You are an Ironman!
This podcast is sponsored by Velo Yellow, providing bike transport to events across Europe. Supported also by Fear the Turtle Triathlon Coaching, Conway Cycles and Vitalize Omagh. Contact details available in the episode description.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 80. Today I'm joined by Shane King. Shane, thanks very much for agreeing to come on to the podcast.
No problem, delighted.
Shane, you and I first met back in 2023 whenever we both completed Ironman Ireland. A very eventful and unforgettable day. And we'll come to that later on in the podcast. We'll chat about that and how we both fared out. But we've been chatting together for quite a while, and we often have had the pleasure of each other's company in the Omagh Leisure Centre. We've been chatting away in the sauna. And the more I've got to know you and the more I've spoken to you, the more I realise that you're a man with many different talents. You've been through so many different sporting elements. And that's why I've asked you on to the podcast. Your journey to triathlon has been a weird and wonderful world of different types of sports, strength work, explosive work, footballing work, all sorts of stuff. There's no point me yapping on about it. Let's hear it from yourself. If we go back in time, Shane, talk us through the school days, back in the day, sports from an early age.
Well, probably my father was a PE teacher, and obviously I had an older brother. So the two biggest influences you have, you try and copy what your dad did and what your brother did. Now, I was very lucky that my father introduced, he was a Gaelic footballer, played for Tyrone for 13 years and spent a lifetime playing for Trillick. But we were introduced to, kayaking. I can't remember not being able to ski, things like that. We went to the swimming pool. It was, Friday evening after school, you went swimming. And then my father was very heavily involved in what was the community games from a very early age. There would have been things like parish sports and school sports that everybody got involved in. Now, PE was very unstructured through primary school. But I probably identified that I was fairly fast from a young age. It was probably the first thing that I noticed. And in terms of Gaelic football, I hadn't really got a great interest when I was very young. I used to enjoy watching my father. And remember, even probably in the early 80s, my first sort of heroes would have been Trillick players. And I remember at one stage being asked, who in primary school, who do you look up to? And the first person who won't name was a Trillick player, and the second person was Kenny Dalglish. So it was just shows you it was a real GA. Carl Lewis, I remember, an early memory for me would have been when the Americans decided they weren't going to the 1980 Olympics, the disappointment. I remember watching the World Championships when Carl Lewis came on the scene and thinking, oh, he's fast. I want to be that fast. And, that sort of reputation, asking my father, how do you do a crouch start? And then probably the first sort of competitive athletics I got involved in was community games. And I actually got to the final of the under 8 60 meters was my first introduction. And going from local level to where you're fast in your primary school, you win your county, you go down there, you make it through the rounds, and in the final, it seemed like there was men racing against me. I was, believe it or not, I was very skinny, I was thin, I just had good cadence. I was very, very small. I wasn't tall at all, not that I ever have become. So that was probably an introduction. But I remember even at that stage at under 8, my father had a harness on me. So there was a lot of sprint mechanics. He worked on sprint mechanics. We, did proper starts, how the drive phase. So I was very lucky that my father introduced me to proper technique and coaching. Obviously, as I grew older, my brother was very, very skilled footballer, and he was much more academic than I was. But once you went to St Michael's and Enniskillen, and at that stage you're probably under 12, and you realise, right, I'm not too bad at this. And if I keep working at this, so you make your school teams. And then again in St Michael's, once a year there'd be the sports day. So you picked your three events that you thought you would do best. Again, in first year, I was probably very good at cross country because it was so light. I was always active, so I probably had a fairly good aerobic capacity. So I was competitive in cross country, and I remember winning E districts and things like that. And then as you went up the level, you were dealing with people that sort of they specified in that, and that's where the gaps kind of. So probably Gaelic football then from the ages of 11 to 17. Although I do remember in my fifth year at school placing in the Ulster, I think it was the 200 I ran in that year. So it was just, and again, throughout primary school, I was probably more interested in Irish dancing. I started Irish dancing when I first went to primary school, and there was a few friends, and I ended up doing set dancing then from 16 to probably 19, and it was just to be involved in everything. My mother was more into music than into sport, and she gave me a great, I was probably listening to music that was maybe 20 years out of my time, and I've always, a bit like yourself, I really love sort of the classics, big into rock. I tell people the first concert I was ever at was the Razor's Edge AC/DC tour, where in reality it was Chris de Burgh, you know. So, music, dancing, and all sorts of sport. The one thing that because I lived in Lisnaskea, you're only getting the swimming pool once a week. I never really concentrated on swimming until much later in life, and it was just so busy. And again, we would have been kayaking because my father went skiing once a year with the school. Maybe one year my older brother would have went. I would have went. It was a couple of years we went ourselves. So we're very lucky. Sailing because we're so close to the share centre in Lisnaskea. We would have spent summers out there kayaking, sailing, swimming. Anything you could do. And again, it's something I have never owned a games console. I have never spent time in arcades. And the thing that I remember my brother in primary school, when he got a watch, was how quickly can you get from the school to the house? Now, we both told lies, but we would have ran home from primary school to see who could get there. My older brother was probably more skilled in Gaelic football. The difference that I had a bit more pace. And that was probably the only thing that separated us. He was probably a braver footballer and a more intelligent footballer. But again, as you move up through the levels, things like pace, I find it easier to put on more muscle mass than he did. So I was probably genetically gifted from my father, and my mother would have been fairly athletic too. Um, but again, the big thing that I think is I had to go at everything. I was in the school choir, I was in the school musical, I went to the Gaeltacht every year, I was in debating. I just tried to immerse myself in as much as I possibly could throughout school. And it's something even throughout university. I had never played rugby before. I ended up playing a season for Donaghadee. I ended up, hopefully we'll talk about it. I ended up going across to England to try out as a professional rugby league player. On my placement year, I was working in Sligo, and one of the guests in the hotel came in, and he was trying to recruit people to do the Boston Marathon for the Sick Children's Hospital in Crumlin in Dublin. And I just said, "Let me see that." I says, "Oh, I'll have a go at that." And without training, I ended up doing the Boston Marathon in '97, and doing it totally wrong, doing no training. Drinking to 1 o'clock in the morning, getting up at 4:30 for the bus, bussing out to Boston, and trying to run a marathon in 100-degree heat without, I did a 7 mile run, I think, on the Saturday. Eamon Coughlin was the patron. So once you heard that, I'm going for a run with Eamon Coughlin. This was an absolute childhood hero from athletics. And incidentally ended up playing on stage with Finbar Fury that night as well. So it's amazing the opportunities and the people you will meet. And it's one of those things, if an opportunity comes up and you think you can do it, just have a go. Um, and the one thing, I was probably very cocky and arrogant. And, when I was younger, it's the one thing I look back with regret. I probably was a little bit talented and thought I was more special than I was. Um, and, that you look back with regret, but I was a young kid. And again, I played in a cover band throughout that time, through my late teens as well. So there was late nights and getting up and training, but I've always been busy. The one thing, it probably took me a while to get my career going because I concentrated on Gaelic football probably until 27, 28. Um, and then I had jumped about from jobs. I studied sports science at Jordanstown and did a master's where my research was in physiology and biomechanics. I had such an interest in biomechanics, but employment opportunities weren't great around here. So I had lectured for a couple of years, and then I ended up in operations management. I had been with leisure development in the city council, and I was ops manager for the Odyssey for 4 years. I worked in London for a while, where again I went out to Lee Valley Athletics Club, and I met Dwayne Chambers, and I trained with Dwayne for 8 or 9 months. And the learning and something like I was doing, like, I think it was 200s, and he was saying, "Oh, your arm action isn't right." And it's something, what do you mean my arm action is right? I know. And little adjustments like that. And that's why I sort of got into masters athletics. And you go from, you're running 56s to 54s to 52, and, all that coaching and real discipline and immersing yourself in it. I had did a little bit of triathlon when I finished playing football. I was actually with Newry, a friend of mine who went in there, and I would have did the one up in Camlock 2 or 3 years in a row, and even did the half iron when it went to Galway. And
Hmm.
then I was doing when I moved away from the Masters Athletics, I was running 5Ks and 10Ks, and I actually had a calf strain, and I've started swimming again to sort of recover. And I met Fergus McGurr in Enniskillen, and he was in training, and he says, "Did you ever think of doing the full Ironman?" So then I went into Omagh, and I was swimming up and down, and I spoke to one of the attendants, and I says, I'm thinking of doing Ironman. He says, "Oh, you should speak to her." And it was Lucy. So Lucy had just been back, and then she says, "So why don't you join the Tri Club?" So that was just before Christmas. So just in the first week in January, I think I thought, right, I'll pay my membership. I'll join for a year, see what happens. And on the second night, I met Kieran Daly, and he said, "Here, we might try this half Ironman at the end of the year." And I says, "Ak, I've did one. Why don't we not just do a full iron?" And he goes, "Are you crazy? It's the second night." And I says, "Look, if we enter it, you can't get out of it, and you have to commit." And again, it's a great way. If you want to challenge yourself, just enter it. And it reminds me of, I remember going for interviews and asked my father, "Have you any advice?" And his was, if they ask you, "Can you tap dance?" you say yes, and you go and learn. And that's for events. Go and enter, and then work as hard as you can. And again, like most triathlon endurance events, two people are racing and everybody else is trying to stay alive. And that's the real crack. But
Right.
I'm sure you would have to say the event itself isn't the most fun, but the lead up and the training and the long cycles and the nights in the pool and going to the lake. You mean, Omagh Tri Club is one of the most social clubs you could be a part of. You know, there's no egos. There's lanes of different ability, but there doesn't seem to be any level of ego, and everybody wants to see everybody do their best, which is,
Mhm.
it's really good. And when I look at, even Gaelic football within clubs, there's rivalry within teams, within positions, athletic clubs, your training group. I trained with a group, and two of the guys I would have been racing against at nationals. Whereas I think that triathlon club in Omagh it's a real social hub. Some people dip in and out. Some people do the swims. Some people do the cycles. Some do the track ones. Some people do them all. And then you have those elite athletes that kind of inspire everybody. We're blessed with the coaching ability that triathlon club has.
Yeah.
Again, we have seen people went from non-swimmer to doing, you know, try the lock to the next year doing half iron and full irons. And this thing about people says, "Oh, I'd love to do a triathlon, but I don't swim." You turn up on a Monday night and you get in that first lane. There's coaches in that club, and it's something I always said. Once you can get yourself up to 12 lengths without stopping, that you can do a triathlon. And I'm sure, like you, some of the triathlons I've done, I have been breaststroking, backstroking, side stroking. We don't all, can't all be like Big Michael and just go in and knock out 120s. But that's the sort of the journey I had, and I suppose from an early age, my father was probably the biggest influence, and one of the worst things you could ever say in our house was "I'm bored." And I remember, probably in my teens, what are you doing on board? And he's come with me, and I ended up having to sand the fascia and paint the fascia around the house for the next couple of weeks. So never said we were bored again. And then it was the sort of thing, have you been to the gym? And I remember saying one night, I was gonna. And that was one thing my father hated. I was gonna. He said, if you're gonna do it, just either do it or don't do it. And if you won't do it, you'll find a reason not to. And if you will. And again, people would say that thing, what motivates you? I think motivation is a very dangerous thing to rely on. I think discipline is a big thing. And even that year of doing that Ironman, making the Monday night and the Wednesday morning meant you only had to make one more swim on your own. You got your 3 swims a week. If you did the cycle on the Sunday, you got 1 turbo and 1 cycle on your own. It was just get into that discipline, let everything become a habit.
Yeah.
But and a bit like I met yourself, and look at the journey that you were on.
Yeah.
When I look at some of the people, and again, it's something people say is what sort of athletes inspire you. I think it's dangerous. People sometimes get inspired by talent, and I think that's not what it's all about. I think it's more frustrating when you know people that have talent and don't push it and bring it to as far as they can. So for me, sports people that either overcome adversity or longevity are the 2 things I find inspiring. And not only just through male, and I think we don't have enough female sports stars that are highlighted. You look at earnings for women's sports outside of maybe tennis or something. With the WNBA, I think we really need to promote some of the females within sport, and especially over here, we definitely don't do it. And it's, I know that Kieran McGeehan's going through a rough time, but again, she has inspired so many people and so many girls, to take up athletics. And I think that really needs to be pushed further. I could never understand it because all male had a mother at some stage. And again, it was when I was playing Gaelic football, and someone was playing well, the first thing people used to say was, who's his father? We get our talent from our mother and our father. And sometimes that's forgotten about.
Shane, that's an unreal account of the journey up until 2023, where we actually met. And you're absolutely right, and there's loads and loads of things that I can pick up on and relate to and bounce back off with that story. But I want to just nip back. I want to explore the Gaelic just a wee bit more because I know you kind of glossed over it, but your Gaelic career, and hence why I'm wearing the old Tyrone top. But your Gaelic career was just ordinary. I mean, you'd said that you were playing inter-county, but you were very successful at St Michael's as well, and very successful with Trillick. Talk me through those Gaelic years, and do you think anything within the Gaelic years has helped you to move into triathlon, or was there any benefit to that?
I
I'm
think
guessing there's probably certain aspects with regards to strength training and endurance work or whatever, but I'll let you educate me.
I think probably initially it's the discipline, discipline and team cohesion, task cohesion. And we went to St Michael's. We had Peter McGinnity and Dominic Corrigan, who went on to be phenomenal coaches. There was the absolute respect that you had for your coach. And again, I was very lucky. Again, I had an older brother, and you had people like Paul Brewster that had been a couple of years ahead of you. Simon Bradley, who was, he was an absolute god in St Michael's. He was playing senior inter-county when he was still there. Now, my father played for Trillick. I grew up playing in Lisnaskea. And again, I was very lucky that we came along with a bunch, and we played in 4 minor finals, league and championship, won 3 of each. And I was very lucky. Lisnaskea senior team sort of came from a Division 2 team, and in around the late 80s and early 90s. So in 1991, when I was 16, I was part of the senior team that won the senior championship. Didn't play in the championship, but came on in the league final as a 16-year-old, and it was just the buzz in the community, and you're on the lorry going up the main street, and it just reminded me of my father when they were in Trillick. That sort of the whole community came behind it, and it was the fact that it becomes part of your identity. Now, later obviously as I got older, as sort of 16 on a McCrory team, we started doing weights. Now, as I said, I was one of the lightest players. But I noticed very quickly I was able to gain sort of strength and muscle. I was very disciplined. Once I started doing weights, I've never really went away from it. And even now, I try and get 2 to 3 sessions a week. I lift heavy. I do low enough reps. I do, I very rarely do 5 sets of 5 would be my mainstay for strength and maintenance. And because of maybe if I've poor back or poor mobility, I'll stretch it out to sets of 10. But again, I only pick 5 exercises a night and I go and do them, and I pick main compound lifts. Again, the fact that I studied sports science at university when I was developing from, when you're 19 and you're looking, how can I get better? Probably was introduced to plyometrics, good coaching in athletics. And again, when I was at university, I went up to the Mary Peters track and joined a sprint group, even though I wasn't sprinting, just to work on my running mechanics. And, if you're fast, you want to get faster. And I've always said, if you're slow, you won't get really fast. But if you can develop good running mechanics, you have less sort of injuries. Again, there's things that I see in Gaelic football. Most Gaelic footballers overstride. They're trying to build strength and mass at the same time. On a Monday night, Tuesday night, they're going and they're turning. There's a massive amount of stress on the body. They're probably not prioritizing recovery in terms of both nutrition, sleep, and what the body needs. And as we sort of spoke earlier, the amount of cruciate injuries and like amount of muscles coming off bones now, it really is. On those successful teams, they're trying to train at a professional level but living amateur lives, and they're trying to get up for work. Again, you train so hard. If you don't have the nutrition, the rest, the hydration, the sleep, you're going to break down. Now, things have dramatically changed. When I remember when I first went to Belfast to study, the bus would have pulled in for a carry out on the way home from county training. If you weren't going out, you got the bags, and everybody else went to Lavery's. Now, things have come on an awful lot from then, but I just think there's a lot of stress on bodies that maybe aren't recovered. And there probably needs to be more periodization where you're doing your strength block, your aerobic block, your power, and getting ready. Now, the season is condensed more now with a split season. And instead of maybe giving county players more time to rest, I think it's actually accented the stress on the body. And you see these players now at the end of a season either not coming back at the start of the next season or having to miss a chunk of their club season so they need a recovery. And if you look back, even within athletics, Mo Farah took 2 separate month blocks off, a 4-week rest at one part of the season and a 4-week at the other. Gaelic football, and even when I played, it just rolled on, and then, as I said, you throw in things like you try and play basketball, you try and play a bit of rugby. I trained with Cliftonville for a while. But again, Gaelic football was always the mainstay. I was lucky I got a Gaelic scholarship at Jordanstown, which financially, and then, you were getting access to proper sports science,
The amount of young people, I remember sitting in the sauna in the health suite in the leisure centre, and there was 2 young lads who were sitting chatting. And you can't help but overhear when you're in that small environment. And they were pretty much looking at each other's scars on their knees.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, look, lads, I don't mean to be rude, but I can't help but overhearing. Can I ask what happened? 2 young, strong lads like yourselves. Football. One of them had both knees done. The other one had his knee done. And it struck me, that these young lads, how are they injuring themselves? And it always seems to be the knee. It seems to be these cruciate ligaments. And I was thinking to myself, I have seen my own children, all my lads played football, and particularly Michael Jr. and Connor growing up. And I've seen them whenever they've reached sort of 14, 15, particularly then moving from 16, 17 and into minors, where they're beginning to put on weight. They're bulking up. And I wonder, were they bulking up too quick? What was the body laying on the weight, muscle weight and upper body strength and everything else, but not allowing the ligaments enough time to adapt to that new load? And then with those short stop studs in the ground, turning on a sixpence, the force going through that knee just isn't ready to deal with. Is that my loose theory? But what's your take on that?
I think there's two reasons to that. I think when kids start lifting weights, they need to be supervised, and their lifting mechanics and techniques need to be proper. I go to Omagh, I see young kids in, and they're trying to squat and they're doing deadlifts with poor technique. So the stress that they're putting on their body, they're not recovering. And the other thing is the run mechanics need to be looked at. And if you look at American footballers, they do this drill where they turn. We get to a corner and we just immediately sidestep. In American football, they turn the body and accelerate. So there's maybe a mechanical way that we can reduce the stress on the turn. In terms of conditioning, we need to look at rotational strength as well. A lot of people will go through the frontal planes and the main lifts, and you need to adapt your body to rotational movement. And that's generally, when the knee, the studs in the ground, the upper body turns, and that's because the stress, and you're already working on fatigued legs and muscles and ligaments that are already been under stressed. And as I said, recovery is as important for a young person as is like we probably prioritize recovery at our age because we have pain. Pain is a signal we need recovery. When you're young, you mightn't have that pain, but it doesn't mean that the body hasn't went through that stress. So I think, two things. If you're going to start doing weights, go to a proper strength and conditioning coach that will have you appropriate technique. Now, I know there's a lot of clubs and development squads are starting on brush shafts and proper technique. And I know that likes of that Tyrone minor team, they're getting coached properly. It's very developmental and it's done at stages. At clubs, again, guys are in such a hurry. They want to play senior. I need to bulk up as quick as I can. There's guys taking all sorts of creatine and protein. Just take your time, allow your body to develop, and look at a more longitudinal approach. Like most of these interventions, the biggest seller now is the 12-week body transformation. Why not take 5 months and do it properly? Why not turn it into a habit? You do a 12-week transformation and you have a coach, and that what happens in week 13 when that guidance isn't there? And I think again, I was that kid that was 16 and was a substitute. Now I want to start. What do I need to do? I need to start lifting weights. Now you need to let your body grow, but it has to be done appropriately. And again, I would have abused my body through my latter teen years and early 20s, and I probably have always had a difficult relationship with alcohol, and that I didn't have. It was the one part of my life I struggled with discipline until around 2011 when I decided I'm going to remove this and just see how things go. And I took 3 months off, and again I didn't drink again until maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And I would never take more than two drinks, and that's my limit. I know myself. If I take that fourth drink, the chances are I'll go missing for 2 days. No,
Yeah.
I don't want to go back to that lifestyle. I think if I hadn't had that intervention, I don't know what might have become of me. At the time, I wanted to show my kids a better example. And training and discipline. Again, I'm lucky. I have 4 boys, and they all go to the gym. They're from late teens to early 20s. And they're fairly
And
athletic.
that's a remarkable coincidence and similarity that we both have,
Yeah.
because I have 4 lads from teenagers to early 20s,
Yeah.
and it was during lockdown that I decided that, and it was the particular aspect of lockdown was that every night was Friday night,
Yeah.
and I was sitting there having cans of beer,
Mhm.
not necessarily wrecking the house or
Mhm.
doing anything bad, but just having these cans of beer pretty much every night. And I looked at myself and I looked at the boys, and I realized this isn't a good example. And it
Mhm.
was that really gave me that kick up the ass too, and inspired me to get off and get after a different version. And thankfully it's worked out. So, yeah, I understand that one. I really do personally. And thanks for sharing it.
Yeah, but again, it's not, and I think probably for my kids, just because you were good at sport, you expect me to be, and it wasn't that at all. And it was even my youngest, Daniel, who never really got involved in organized sport and started running. And the first time he ran with me, did a sub-19 5K, having no training. And you're going, where did this come from? So then I buy
Yeah.
him a better pair of trainers, and like I would have never known that he was that talented. Like my daughter, I have 4 boys and a girl. My daughter probably had the most natural ability of all the kids, and was very competitive at gymnastics and was playing rugby for Ballynahinch. And then unfortunately, her came out of COVID when it did GCSEs and exams kind of took over. But again, I'd be hopeful that she would get involved in some sort of, I think the social side of sport for women is fantastic. They meet like-minded. The last thing, traditionally women's dropout rate was between 15 and 17. Then they go and have their families. The man's allowed to run away and play his football all he wants. The woman stays at home and looks after the kids. And maybe later in life they get back to something. So again, I'd like to see if there was a cultural change. I think we need to keep young girls and women involved in sport. As I said earlier, we all have mothers. If your mother was more involved in sport, you're more likely. And I think even in sociological studies, kids with active mothers are more likely to be active rather than their fathers. And I don't know what the reason behind that is. Probably because younger kids spend more time around their mothers in their formative years when they're developing their habits. And then obviously as kids move into their late teens and 20s, the opportunity to do sport with their dad. I mean, last year I did the 7-7s and the Mourns with Daniel. That sort of just being active, have a go at anything. Myself and my partner, we did, I think we did Slave Donard, Arrigal, Croagh-Patrick and Carntool over the space of a few months. All of a sudden then my son is, I'm going to do this. He's taking his friends up the mountains, so I think being active as a parent is the best example you can give.
It
Oh,
really is, and it can be
yeah,
broken down into the most simplest thing. I have
yeah,
this wee saying. I know there's real deep seated academic work and developmental psychological stuff behind it, but it breaks down very simply as monkey see, monkey do.
yeah,
So, and there's no expectation or pressure on any of the kids to become
yeah,
into
that's true.
triathlon, for example, or to do this, that, and the other. But each of them, one by one, have watched me do my thing, and they have taken a level of inspiration from that. And thank God, they're all very fit, very active. Either into their gym work, their football, their handball.
Mm.
One of the boys, all of them are into strength work and things like that. So, and it's
I,
the same with your kids. So
I,
it's
I
great. It's a
actually,
fantastic thing.
I actually think your journey to me is more inspiring than some international athlete that was born with talent. Like see the people that come to a crossroads in their life and turn it around. I just find that really inspiring. You see people that, some of my coaches, I know a coach that, went to retire and his wife passed a couple of months after retirement and never wavered, never was, and what was I called, emotionally and morally incorruptible. Whereas I always felt if something went bad, poor me, I can go off the rails for a while. You did the opposite of that. You seen yourself going down, you had the same sort of rock and roll lifestyle as I had for a while. And
Yeah.
when you turn that corner, I think it's almost like an epiphany. You do it at the start and it's a struggle and you're going, why am I doing this? Look at the state of me. I should be doing this. And then all of a sudden you go, oh, this is why. And you get that endorphin and you realize, oh, this is so good. You come back from that cycle on a Sunday. And the first couple of times you do it, I used to pray for bath doctor. We used to come back into Omagh and I used to be coming out of towards Fenton going bath doctor, bath doctor. I knew if I got there, I could get to the finish. And then people go into the sauna and the social side of it takes over. And that feeling that you're on a high the rest of a Sunday. Again, even at the weekend, I wanted to do something. So I went cycling at 10 to 6 on a Sunday morning. And you can go out and you can either do your 6 hours or you can blitz it for an hour and a half, 2 hours. So, but again, I think the thing is develop discipline. And if I had any advice for kids growing up, is try and develop discipline and emotional control. Because the things that I used to fly off the handle on, even later in life as an adult, if you can control your emotion and have discipline and continuity in your activities and your behaviors, life gets better. And it's crazy that old saying, I think it was Gary Player, the harder I train, the luckier I get. And I think is the more consistency you put into your training and your lifestyle, the rest of your life starts getting better. You get more balance. Your relationships are better. When I think of, I used to go and play a football match on a Friday night and go drinking for 5 or 6 hours and Saturday morning was a washout. You'd wake up. Ford Super Sunday was on. I'm going up to watch, there's a Premier League game at 12. You come back at 7. And then you're back into the next week, and there's no lunches made for the kids. And once you turn things around and you sort of get your blocks, right, I'm going to train early so I can do something in the afternoon. All right, the World Cup finals on. No, I want to go to the cinema with my family, or with whatever's on, and life
Yeah.
just gets better. Um,
Talk
but
me through then, Shane, how you applied that consistency, the discipline, and all the things that you've spoken about and you're learning to your triathlon journey. So let's
well,
talk about
yeah,
that night in the pool whenever you said to young Kieran,
yeah,
what about signing up for the full? Talk me through what happened. That was January. We were
yeah,
looking ahead then to the 20th of August. I remember the date because it was the
yeah,
day I turned 50. The
yeah,
20th of August would have been about 7 months away.
yeah.
It's just over 7 months. What did you do? How did you work through that to get yourself from a couple of lengths in the pool with OTC
Mm.
to lining up down in Youghal?
Yeah. Well, I had remembered from my time in Uri that the first night I went there, I think I did 2 laps and I held on to the side of the pool for dear life. And nothing beats consistency. And I knew that Monday night was really good coaching. And Michael, you landed there. You didn't have to think. And again, that was the beauty of playing Gaelic football. You went to training, you brought your gear, and somebody else told you exactly what to do. And we had this facility in Uri on a Monday evening and a Wednesday morning. You turned up and someone wrote out what you needed to do to try and get better. So I sort of knew if I make Mondays and Wednesdays, I'm going to try and get one more day in the pool on my own where I'll maybe go for distance. So the way the Monday structure was, you went in, you did your warm up, you did your drills, you did different things. And Wednesday was something similar. So then I used to try and get either a Friday or Saturday and build it up. And the first thing was get to 750. So you did your 12 lengths, which because it swam before got to there. Get to 750, get to your 1K, get to your 2K. And I never really went above the 3K. The next thing was the consistency in the cycling. Again, we're very lucky. I did the Sunday mornings. And then after about a month or so, myself and Kieran sort of realized, look, we need to be doing longer cycles. So we did a big cycle every weekend. Now, some of the crack that we had on those cycles, we went down through Monaghan and back over Rosslea. Kieran got hit by a van. So we did.
Jesus.
We went down. We decided we'd go from Omagh down through Kesh, Balik, and those signposts were saying Balik 15 mile, Balik 15 mile. And the next one said Balik 17 mile. And the crack, or who's gonna speak first. And then with things like we stopped for coffee one day. We're about 2 mile out the road, and Kieran realised I've left my phone in the coffee shop. And in your head you're thinking, I've only this left, and you're going, oh God, I have to turn it. We turned and went back. The one thing that I didn't really get that year is I was refereeing a lot, and I had sort of a lot of back injuries. And again, I had did a lot of ego lifting, I'll say, in the gym at one stage, and was trying to get my deadlift up to 260 kilos, and I hurt my back, and I've probably never really got the mobility, and I probably didn't concentrate, because once it's pain free, I tend to go back. It's one thing I probably need to do more mobility and flexibility work. I see Conor Maguire, and when I'm in the gym, and his flexibility and his mobility is amazing. It's one of the things I know I need to do that, but I just prioritize other things. So my running was very poor, and up until I don't think I had ran for the 4 weeks before Cork. But even that, see that the weekend we went, I remember we went down on the Friday night. I think I went down Friday and Saturday. I think the rain, and remember the half iron was postponed on the Saturday. On the Sunday
Yeah.
morning, I was in such a panic that because where I was staying, I came in, I couldn't get into town, couldn't get parked. Um, I went to the toilet, and my ankle, the chip, I
Uh-huh.
must have taken it off. I got to the start line and realised there'd no chip on. So then I had to go to the front, and in fairness, Kieran came with me, and I got a new chip. And instead of going right to the back where we normally started, I said, you know something, let's get in near the start, and we were looking at our waves. And again, that day, the amount of half iron people that went off first, that ended up getting out. And again, not being a strong swimmer. And I remember me and Kieran says, right, we're just going to go for this. We get to the first buoy, and normally I would breathe every 2 strokes, and I went into the water, and I think it might have been 17 strokes before I took my first breath, and I had decided I'm getting to the first turn, and then it's up to God what happens next. So,
Yeah.
and luckily enough,
Mhm.
I got to that first turn without being touched. I got rounded. There was a guy in front of me. I was on his feet, and 2 guys either side. I had probably the best swim I had that year. And at one stage, I thought, I think I can go right round this guy. But when you're drafting somebody and swimming, and it was that no, calm down, calm down. Now, unfortunately, when I was getting out of the water, one of the guys that unfortunately passed that day, they were working on him, and it was
Yeah.
that your next sort of, unfortunately, your hour, and it's just such a feeling. It's almost, you almost feel, looking back on it, a bit of PTS. That it was just, and you didn't know what had happened at that stage. But in terms of the performance, it meant, because I'd went into the water earlier, I was getting out earlier, and you're getting out with better cyclists. And even though you're not actually drafting, you're sort of in the flow. It's a bit like when you're driving on the motorway. You tend, without looking at the speedometer, you start moving at the same speed as everybody else. I was hoping to go through the first lap in about 3.5 hours, and I went through in 2:50 and realized this is totally unsustainable. So my second lap in Yall that day was abysmal. I have poor eyesight. I drove past the food stop, so I was lifting Mars bars and energy drinks that I would never have. So my second lap on the bike was a lot slower. I think it was just under 3.5. But because I hadn't eaten my own food, I went out on the run, and the first thing I had to do was hit the Portaloo, and I spent about 25 minutes in a Portaloo. And when I came out,
Uh-huh.
the woman outside had said to me, "Are you okay?" Because it sounded like there was a brass band practicing inside it. It was just, and again, one of the funny things, I don't know about you, in the run, you're running in that, and you think, right, I'm going to run into that lamppost, and all of a sudden your body says, no, you're not. You're stopping now. And
Yeah.
you had very little control over how long you were going to run and how jog for. And I remember trying to get like Red Bull crisps as much as I could, and that little area of the housing estate where, and I
Uh-huh.
wore a hat, where they would soak your hat and you could put your hat on. And then the other thing was, when you kept seeing the people from the club, I just thought that was brilliant. So it was, every so
Yeah.
often you'd meet somebody else, and even though you'd no energy, everybody spoke to everybody else. It was just, and I think that whole collective, even though triathlon is an individual achievement, there was a great collectiveness. I thought that weekend, that everybody that took part in it, and I remember going for breakfast the next morning, being absolutely exhausted, but you almost were more euphoric when you seen someone, with all their finishers, medals, and T-shirts on. And again, people that haven't did that, that say, "Oh, I could never do that." Go and stand near the finish line of an Ironman. There's all sorts of shapes, sizes, bodies, people that you think could carry weight. Even like there was a guy past me with one leg, and you're thinking, that's inspirational. The fact that we're doing this and we think we've overcome a few social alcohol issues, there's people, just nothing will hold them back. And I think
Absolutely. Yeah.
watching an Ironman finish line is one of the most inspiring things you can do. And some of the journeys that people have come from, some of the fundraising, or the things in their life that have got them to do that, to either raise money or is just decide, I'm not what has happened to me in my past. I am the architect of my future. And again, that attitude, I find that so inspiring. And again, it's not about people that come in 7, 8 hours. It's the person that gets across the line with 10 seconds to go, and they couldn't swim a year ago, or they'd been in a car crash, or they lost their mother or father or something. I just think that's the epic achievement that inspires people to do things. And that's, if they can do that, then I can do that. Because when we look at these people doing 7 hours, yourself, I could never ever do that. And to try and get near that, the changes I'd have to make to my body are not something I would want. But when you see somebody get across the line that maybe 12 months ago was on a ventilator or recovering from illness, and they can do that, I just find those stories really, really inspire me, you know? But
Yeah, you and me both.
that 7-8 months, and it was just a wee crazy. And it was just, that night that we were getting out, and I think Sean Gillespie was there too. And Sean goes, "What have you entered the half?" He goes, "We entered the full," and he had entered the half at that stage. And he goes, "You's mad." I goes, "Sure, Sean, if you're going to do it, go and do it." And he went and changed his entry and went up to the full then. Um, and I remember thinking, I bet you he was so glad that he spoke to us that night. Now, people thought we were crazy. I hadn't did a triathlon in about 10 years, and I did the Dungannon half, and I had got a new wetsuit a couple of weeks before that, and I went down to Loch Macrory, and I couldn't breathe. I just couldn't get my breath. And I was thinking, this is crazy. And it was Big Michael says, "Have you a new wetsuit on?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, just don't panic. It's probably tight and you can't breathe." So the week before the half in Dungannon, there was a Friday night, and it was absolutely lashing. And I remember Kieran was sort of hoping that I would say, "We're not going to do this practice swim." So we did the practice swim for the half iron, and that was probably the first time I thought, "No, this we can reach this, we can do this." Didn't have the greatest performance in that half, because it was the sort of thing, do a hold back, do a push, and again
Yeah.
the cycle, because you're going up and down the carriageway, and the good guys are whizzing past you, and it's a bit like when I did the Boston Marathon. I went for that run with Eamon Coughlin. I said, "Have you any advice for the marathon?" Eamon? He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "If you think you're going too slow, you probably need to slow down." And it was just, he goes, the amount of people, someone passes them and they pick it up. And again, a funny story from Boston Marathon, and anyone that's ever done it, they bus you out of the city and you run back in. You come round the corner and you see the big archway, the finish line. Unfortunately, most people are more aware of it for the bomb. But when you see that, for some reason, people pick it up and pick the pace. The amount of people that tear hamstrings and cramp when they see that, and then someone passed you maybe 15, 20 times. Once you see that archway, you think, all right, it's mono a mono. I'm taking off here, and everybody runs. So, and it was a wee bit like that. When we come round in Youghal, and you didn't have to turn right, and you knew you were going round the corner, and you could hear people ringing the bell, and the crowds roaring.
Yes.
And I almost thought there was it was very emotional. I did this, something that once seemed impossible. I've done it. It's possible.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And again, it's a very internal, personal feeling. I was very lucky. My brother was there at the finish line, and my kids had come down. It is emotional. When you see that, and again, that's why I would say to somebody, never think that you can't do something. You can, if you apply yourself. Surround yourself with the right people, and be positive, and you can almost achieve anything. Again, I look back to that sort of 15, 16-year-old really skinny kid that thought I'd never be strong enough to play Gaelic football at senior club level. I was lucky. I played inter-county. I played for Ulster. Now I worked pretty damn hard to get my body, someone that's just a bit over 5'9" to do that. And in a time in those 90s where some of the defenders that I marked, they were big, strong men, and anybody that's ever tried to run around Faye Devlin would attest to the condition you would need to be in. But again, it's we're all on a journey, and everybody's on a separate one. None of us have any idea what's going on in anybody else's life. But I think sport, it's an opportunity to bring people together and encourage everybody. I look at the things, at the minute, some of the events that Damien O'Hagan has undertaken, that is just incredible. And I know Damien probably would have to accept he's a wee bit on that crazy spectrum, that he will take on anything. And I would encourage people, you don't need to be that crazy, but take on your own challenge. And maybe if you've never walked up Sleeve Donard, or if you've never went up, the back of Gorch and Glen, start on something like that, and set yourself a short goal. And once you realize you can achieve that, just keep pushing, just keep pushing. And
Shane, you're a man that has come up through the ranks of so many different aspects of sport. We started chatting about from Irish dancing into athletics, football, dabbled in rugby, find yourself a lot of weights, a lot of training, plyometrics, your sports science stuff. There's so many different skill sets, so many different sports. Growing up, was there anybody or any sports person that maybe gave you inspiration that you thought of as you were growing up, thinking, this is something I need to be doing, or this, can you think of anybody?
Again, as I've always said, it's whilst talent is really entertaining, it wasn't really people with the most talent that inspired me. And again, there was players that played with my father in the club that had did cruciate. And back in them days, if you had a knee injury in the 70s and 80s, your career was over. And I remember watching, one he actually played in the middle of the field with my father to recover from this knee injury and get back to the level that he did. And again, initially that Trillic Gaelic football team, I remember probably the one in 80, the one in 83, and they were too old and they couldn't do it. And the manager, John Donnelly, would have the hairs on the back of your neck, and they were playing Dungannon, and it's one of these things that I'll never forget. They're playing Dungannon in the championship final, and Dungannon had this big, massive guy, Audie Hamilton, who was a phenomenal club player in the middle of the field, and they drew with him the first day. And I remember going out and the manager saying to the midfielder, we're same thing again, you're going to break the ball. And he just said, no, I'm catching today. And I remember this determination, the hairs on the back of my neck. And it's the sort of thing like, that reinforced, I'm not going to try, I am. And that would have inspired me. And again, probably nowadays, I see people like, Caroline O'Hanlon is playing for Armagh ladies for 22, 23 years. She's playing netball. As I said, the Kieran McGeehan story, this young girl from Portaferry, who I actually coached in primary school, become this international runner. And I remember speaking to her father when she was probably second or third year, when she was starting, I goes, well, she'll probably have to give up camogie. And him saying, oh, no, she's, this GA family, and to look to what she went on to do. I've been very lucky. I've met some very talented athletes. Again, meeting Eamon Coughlin was an absolute joy, to train over, when I was training over in Lee Valley, the year I worked in London, to train with Dwayne Chambers and see, I met Christine O'Haragu, some of these people and some of the stories that they had, but probably the most inspirational people are the everyday people that decide they're going to do something. And I know a big Foo Fighters fan, there goes my hero. It's everybody in every aspect of life can be their own hero. And you don't know who you're inspiring. You really don't. You could meet somebody, as I said, you're meeting people in the sauna. And if you say, oh, throughout a lot of my teenage and 20s, I drank and messed about, I was into rock and roll, I was into this. And then one day I decided I'm going to have a go at this. I think that is more inspiring than someone that was talented from day one and never really had to work hard at anything. And those players that just wouldn't give up and they kept going and they kept going. Like the Tom Brady story that, he was told he wasn't good enough. You'd never be doing that. But there was some sort of inner belief that he thought. Now, again, as a child, Kenny Dalglish was just, he was everything, that a 5-year-old wanted to be when you watched, if you're allowed to sit up on your dad's knee. My father probably was massive in my life. I've probably never really got over his loss, um, which is tough, because it's 11 years now,
Yeah,
and it still find it very hard to talk about. But I was very blessed that he introduced me to sport, and that's probably where I get my drive from.
good
Um,
stuff. You've
it's
done him proud. You've done him proud, and
I hope
and
so.
and the lifestyle that you've taken on and how you've inspired your own kids is testament to the man he was. Because in your children lives your spirit, and your spirit has been passed down from him. Like, so, it's all good. It's you know, it's a fantastic thing, and to leave a legacy and to have memories, and the fact that he still touches your heart so softly after 11 years is testament to the man he was. Let's talk about what happened after Ironman Ireland, Shane, because lots of people do an Ironman and they think, we'll have that box ticked and that's me now. And you maybe fall back into old ways. And we have seen it. Some people do it and some people don't. Um, you fall into the category of don't. So you have set yourself a couple of other targets and you've went after some big events. So I wanna just pick up on your journey because you mentioned a craziness, and there's a crazy element, I suppose, to this endurance crack. But you've been active and you've been doing a lot of training recently. Talk me through what you've been through since, particularly this year.
Yeah. Well,
Big ultras and lots and lots of training.
yeah, well, again, the fact that Kieran Daly and myself probably, and it's strange because I think Kieran was probably 24, 25, and I was in my late 40s when I met him, and our fathers actually played against each other in the 70s and 80s. But Kieran was sort of, the fact that we had become training partners, we always kept in touch. And it was, Kieran had did a few ultras, and it was just that we talked about doing ultras, and then that 108 mile from Ballintoy to Gorchin was advertised, and we thought we'd take a crack at it. So we had did a few, in your training, we stretched it and stretched it. And oddly enough, there was one night I decided I was going to do, I think, 50 mile round Omagh, and I was going to start at 8 o'clock at night just to get used to it. And as I was running out towards Killyclogher, a van pulled over and he said, you okay, son? Do you need a lift? And I says, no, I'm training for an event. And he goes, are you sure you're okay? I was going,
He
maybe
was
I'm
going to
not.
drop you off at the TNF.
Yeah, maybe I'm not okay. So we had that there. Now, unfortunately, Kieran, he had a knee ligament injury, so he had to pull out with about 2 weeks to go. So I decided I'd give it a go myself. Now, there was a couple of things that I did wrong. You have to put the route into your Garmin. I didn't want to run wearing glasses. I'm long sighted, so I couldn't see my Garmin, and there's a wee arrow on it. Now I fell in with a doctor up there, and just after halfway, I got that sort of that anorexic feeling where I was struggling to take food on. I had like a 20-minute sleep, and I kept going for about another 4.5, 5 hours. But unfortunately, again, I didn't listen to the advice. I didn't tape my feet properly. And at about 73 miles, when I was coming down into Dungiven, my left foot ripped, across the ball of my foot. My shoe was filling up with blood. Now, at that stage, I was trying to eat and I was heaving. Now, I honestly think I could have went on. My thinking at the time was, if I go on here, I'll not be fit to do any training for about a month and a half. So I think I'll
Yeah.
call it a day. I phoned my partner and she came and collected me. Now, it really, I don't like, I wouldn't call it a failure. Quitting is failure. I didn't quit. I stopped. Now there was another one on this weekend in Belfast that I had thought about doing. But since then, myself and Kieran have decided, we haven't decided on a date, but we're going to try and create one of the biggest triathlons. So without saying where we're doing it, we're hoping to do a 10K swim. We're going to cycle the length of Ireland, and then we're going to do 100K. So we're just waiting to pick our weekend, our locations. We're in the latter stages of getting that. We're probably going to do that in September. We might, in terms of finding somewhere, because of the weather, it's going to be very difficult to pick a weekend and just find somewhere to do a 10K swim. So we might do the 10K in a pool, head off. We'll probably do Mizzen to Malin, and possibly try and run from Malin Head back to Omagh Leisure Centre. I think that'd be a nice place to finish because well, that's where we centred all our training. The Tri Club was kind of based there. So again, we're in the latter stages of trying to lock down. We're get people to do a bit of support on the van and stuff like that there. So that will be the next attempted challenge. Now, again, whether we do all of it, we do some of it, or someone, Kieran's, because of his injury, the run will be difficult for him. So we'll try and push it back, but still do it early enough in September that we have enough daylight. And probably do Mill de Maz and try and target it over 3 days. So if we do a 10K, and then do our 3 days cycling, and then on maybe the fourth day, if we could do I think it's 106 kilometers from Malin Head back to Omagh Leisure Centre. So, whether that's a walk or a jog, but that is the target at this stage. It's just locking it down. And staying injury free is a big thing as well.
A big target, a big challenge.
Yeah.
Um, do you know what? It sounds phenomenal. It sounds brilliant. Is
Yeah.
there is there is there going to be any sort of events around it, or he's publicising it, or is there a
Well,
charity element to
we
it, or is
do.
it just two lads with a wacky idea and away they go?
Well, it's kind of a wacky idea, but now with both, I know obviously Kieran had lost his aunt and Damien's mum, so we had thought about we started a fundraiser, to raise money for the Marie Curie nurses and stuff. So Kieran
Yeah,
had shared that there. So once we tie down the date, we'll probably share the link about, and
brilliant stuff.
hopefully we'll try and raise some money. Again, there's a lot of other fundraisers going on with different things, and you need to be cognizant that you're not interfering with other things like that. Again, the main challenge is to do something strange and wacky, and that to try and do something each year that you never thought you could do. Now, something else that I want to do is I want to do Ben Nevis, Scaffold Pike, and Snowdon in 3 days as well. That's something that I'll hope to do. Um, I don't know whether I'll get it done this year because you're very weather dependent, and Ben Nevis after October it's hit or miss. You're nearly better to wait until March April time. Now, in saying that, I had went up Ben Nevis as a child with my father, and it's something I've always wanted to go back and do. It'll be very emotional, but I'd like to do it when there's a winter element to it. But again, as I said, myself and my partner Grania, we did Carntool last year, and by the time we got to the top, we could hardly see each other. Um, on the way down, I took a wrong turn, and we ended up having to down climb cliff edges to get back down to the
Oh
lake, so we
Jesus!
could find it. And it was later on that night having something to eat when she realised that unfortunately 6 people over the last 5 years had lost their lives. Had she known that, I don't think she would have went up. But she stayed very calm, and we look back on it and we laugh about it now. But I'd like to do adventures like that there. But again, things like going to the gym 2 or 3 times a week with her is as important to me as completing these big challenges. I just like to stay active. I'm big into the sort of the whole, the saunas. I do a lot of fasting. The last 4 or 5 years, I try and do 5-day fasts. 3 or 4 times a year, just because of the longevity aspect of it. And sauna and cold plunge. Whilst I think it's highly overrated, I do enjoy that feeling of it. As I said, I did those marathon swims 2 years ago. I did the Gale Force. And unfortunately, I did them in skins, which wasn't the best idea when you're not the best swimmer. Because if you're a good swimmer and you do the skins swim in an hour, it's not so bad. See, when you're poor like me and you're up into 3 hours in cold seawater, I ended up in the hypothermia tent after that, and my tongue was swollen and my hands were clawing over the last kilometre in the water. But again, I think when I look back, that makes the challenge even more beneficial. But again,
Brilliant stuff.
there's always a challenge around the corner that we can all do. And hopefully, as long as my body enables me to do that, I'll try and keep training and keep lean muscle mass on, keep pushing, my cardiovascular system, and it just the mental health aspect of it as well. Like, it's really hard to be in
Yeah,
bad form when you've completed something like that. There, your whole mood. Unfortunately, sometimes it's very short. That euphoria, and I think you need to find your what's next. As you said, a lot of people will do an Ironman, and that's it. I've done it, and I think there's nothing else to done. You'll always keep looking. You'll find something, whether it's a cycle, a run, or whether it's helping other people. And you look at the people that came to Omagh Tri Club, and they're now involved in coaching young people, either in the pool, or cycling. Look at Big Michael, what he has done for the swimmers at that club. You look at the guys that plan the cycle route, every Sunday. So there's always a different challenge there. And you look at the age of some of the age group, the older members of Omagh Tri Club. It's remarkable.
absolutely phenomenal. Yeah, men, women, still kicking ass, and that's great. And those are the guys that inspire me. And the thing that I like about what you've said there is whenever there's an event, like, so if you do an Ironman and you think that's it, I suppose that for people, that is it. That's okay. And that's fine. But
Yeah, well,
you can just do something like you have done and just
yeah,
think, well, let's make up an event. Let's go and do an
yeah,
event.
yeah,
So what you and Kieran are doing, you might even argue is more impressive because there is no razzmatazz attached to it. There
yeah,
is no big publicity about it. There won't be a big grandstand finish. It'll be
no,
two boys with this plan and that personal feeling, the satisfaction, and whatever way it pans out is going to be something that you're not going to be able to bottle anyway.
yeah,
So I find that those types of personal challenges that people undertake
yeah.
are
But it's
more
even,
difficult, you
yeah, but
know.
even with those training, and it's the amount of times that Kieran will say to me, "There's wiser eating grass." It's just that's how you know it's crazy. We're out on a Saturday, Sunday morning. I remember that time we'd maybe been on the bike for 7 hours, and he goes, "You know something? There's wiser eating grass." It was just, and I go, "That's why we do it." That is, as you say, that combination of adventure and crazy, can never be understated.
Shane, you keep doing it and keep us all informed, and I'll look forward to following the journey for the rest of the year.
No problem. It's been a joy to join your podcast. Long may it continue.